All right, you little mathematicians. We're going to go through problem number 8 from the percents, rates, and ratios review. So, Mr. Condrick has 5 pair of shoes for every 10 pairs Mrs. Condrick has. We're going to do A and begin by just writing the ratio of Mr. Condrick's shoes to Mrs. Condrick's shoes. So, Mr. Condrick has 5 for every 10 that Mrs. Condrick has. That is a ratio of 5 to 10. Now, of course, if you have me as a teacher, and I'm guessing Mrs. Condrick and Mrs. Woodruff do this as well, you probably want to simplify this. Always a good idea to simplify. So I will divide both of these by 5. I notice that both these numbers can be divided by 5. And I will get a ratio of 1 to 2. Now my task is to come up with 3 equivalent ratios for the ratio I created in part A. So the ratio I created after I simplified was 1 to 2. I need to come up with 3 equivalent ratios for that. Well, 1 to 2, I can, of course, multiply both of those numbers by 2, and that will give me 2 to 4. I could then double those numbers. I'd get 4 to 8. And then I could double those again, get 8 to 16. Of course, there are an infinite number of possible answers to this. Here are some more, just for fun. Of course, that one we kind of started with. So you might have answers that look something like this. All these are totally fine, and there are tons more. So those are equivalent ratios. All right, now it's asking us to create a tape diagram for the ratio that we created in A. So now I know some of you might have just left the ratio at 5 to 10 in A, so your tape diagram might look a little different than mine. There's a picture of that on the actual review sheet. You can take a look at that example. But I'm going to do what my ratio was, which is 1 to 2. So creating a tape diagram, Mr. K's 1 to Mrs. K's 2. And there we go. There's my tape diagram. Part C complete. However, I now also want to talk about Part D. If Mrs. Condrick had 50 more pairs of shoes than her husband, how many shoes does Mrs. Condrick have? First, we need to find the part of the tape diagram that represents how many more shoes Mrs. Condrick had than Mr. Condrick. So, Mr. Condrick has this many shoes, and Miss Condrick does too. But then Miss Condrick also has more. This part represents the more shoes that Mrs. Condrick has. And the problem is telling us that Mrs. Condrick has 50 more shoes. And of course, if a 50 is going in that box, a 50 is going in every box. So how many shoes does Mr. Condrick have? He has 50. And the question was asking how many shoes does Mrs. Condrick have? She has 50 plus 50, which is 100. Hope this helps. Keep studying. Good job. Thank you for watching. And we'll see you on Monday. Adios.